Picture a world where the first flashes of human civilization took shape, where the earliest cities rose from the fertile mud of Mesopotamia, and with them, customs so strange they'd make your jaw drop. This is the legacy of the Sumerians, humanity's very first civilization, a people who gave us writing, the wheel, and laws, but also rituals and beliefs that would leave modern minds utterly baffled. Imagine a society where priests dressed as fish to commune with gods, where rulers measured their worth by how much beer they could drink, and where the boundary between medicine and magic was so blurred, a doctor's prescription might include a spell whispered into a clay figurine. These weren't just quirks, they were the fabric of daily life in a world both astonishingly advanced and deeply mysterious. Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, was more than just the cradle of civilization. It was a laboratory of the bizarre, a place where the mundane and the mystical collided in ways we're still unraveling today. The Sumerians didn't just invent bureaucracy and astronomy, they also believed demons lurked in every corner, waiting to curse the unwary. They built towering ziggurats not just as temples, but as stairways for gods to descend to earth. And their obsession with the afterlife, let's just say their burial practices, would make even the most daring horror writer pause. But here's the thing, behind every strange custom was a logic, a way of making sense of a world where chaos and order were locked in eternal struggle. So why does any of this matter? Because the Sumerians weren't just odd, they were us. Their fears, their ambitions, their desperate attempts to control the uncontrollable mirror our own, even after 5,000 years. And that's what makes their strangeness so fascinating. It's a reflection of humanity's first steps into the unknown, a reminder that civilization has always been a mix of brilliance and sheer weirdness. Over the next few minutes, we'll dive into 30 of their most jaw-dropping practices, from the shocking to the darkly humorous, and uncover the surprising truths behind them. Some will make you laugh, others might send a chill down your spine, but one thing's for certain, you'll never look at history the same way again, ready to step into their world. Let's begin. The Sumerians took the connection between the divine and the earthly to extremes few cultures ever dared, and nothing proves that more shockingly than their sacred prostitution rituals. In the temples of Inanna, the fierce goddess of love, war, and fertility, priestesses known as the Intu performed acts that blurred the line between worship and intimacy. These weren't merely ceremonies, they were believed to be cosmic necessities. Every year during the sacred marriage rite, the high priestess would embody Inanna herself, coupling with the king, who took on the role of Dumusid, the goddess's mythological consort. This wasn't just symbolism, it was thought to literally renew the land's fertility, ensuring bountiful harvests and the survival of the kingdom. Archaeology backs this up. At the ruins of and Uruk, tablets describe these rituals in startling detail, while carvings show priestesses offering themselves to strangers as an act of devotion. Some texts even list the donations left by participants: grain, silver, or livestock, given not as payment, but as tribute to the goddess. And here's where it gets even stranger. For lower-ranking priestesses, this wasn't a once-a-year event. Many lived within temple precincts, serving as intermediaries between mortals and the divine through acts later misinterpreted by outsiders as mere prostitution. To the Sumerians, though, there was nothing scandalous about it. This was divine work, a sacred transaction where pleasure and prayer intertwined. Why did they believe this worked? Because in their eyes, the fate of the world hung in the balance. If the rituals weren't performed correctly, the gods might withhold the annual floods that nourished their crops. A failed harvest meant starvation, chaos, the collapse of order. So while modern minds might recoil at the idea, to the Sumerians, these acts were as vital as irrigation canals or city walls. They were threading the needle between human desire and cosmic duty, ensuring the world kept turning. And that's the real lesson here. What seems bizarre to us made perfect sense in a world where every gust of wind, every sprouting seed, was a whispered conversation with the divine. The artifacts tell the tale. Cylinder seals depict priestesses with vessels of sacred beer preparing for rites. Temples held private chambers where these unions took place, often adorned with symbols of Inanna's lion and the date palm, emblems of her power. Even the famous epic of Gilgamesh hints at this practice when the wild man in Kiddu is civilized through an encounter with a temple woman. It wasn't just about fertility, it was about taming chaos, forging order from the raw forces of nature. So next time someone reduces these rituals to mere ancient scandal, remember, the Sumerians didn't see bodies as vulgar. They saw them as conduits for the divine, as tools to keep the universe in balance. In a world without science, where gods felt terrifyingly close, sometimes the most logical thing to do was to meet them halfway, no matter how unconventional the method. If you think your job pays poorly now, imagine getting your wages in beer. For the Sumerians, this wasn't just a happy hour fantasy, it was standard practice. Workers building ziggurats, digging canals, or crafting pottery were often compensated not with silver or grain, but with freshly brewed beer carefully measured out in daily rations. Cuneiform tablets from the city of Umma record precise payments: 2 liters for laborers, 3 for supervisors, and even 5 for high-ranking officials. This wasn't a quirky perk, it was a formalized economic system, with beer acting as both fuel and currency in a society where survival depended on calorie-dense sustenance. But why beer? The answer lies in Mesopotamia's unforgiving environment. Water from the Tigris and Euphrates, while life-giving, was often contaminated with parasites and bacteria. Beer, though, underwent fermentation, a process that killed pathogens while preserving calories. The Sumerians didn't just drink it, they relied on it. Their beer, called kash, was thick, porridge-like, and packed with nutrients, closer to a meal than a modern lager. Archaeologists have found communal straws made of gold and lapis lazuli, evidence that drinking was a shared ritual. These straws weren't just practical, they filtered out sediment, but symbolic, reinforcing bonds between workers as they leaned over the same vessel. The scale of this system was staggering. Temple archives from Lagash reveal that large construction projects required thousands of liters of beer monthly, with entire breweries operating to meet demand. One tablet even details a dispute between a foreman and his workers over stale beer rations, an ancient labor grievance proving that quality control mattered just as much then as it does now. And it wasn't just manual laborers who benefited. Artists, scribes, and even bureaucrats received beer as part of their compensation, blurring the line between sustenance and salary. Here's what's truly revealing. Beer wasn't just a commodity, it was a social equalizer. From the king's court to the humblest brickmaker, everyone consumed it, though the elite might spice theirs with dates or honey. This universality hints at a deeper truth. The Sumerians saw no divide between the practical and the sacred. Beer was a gift from Ninkasi, the goddess of brewing, whose hymn doubles as the world's oldest recorded recipe. To drink it was to partake in divine wisdom, to transform grain into something that nourished both body and community. So the next time you sip a cold one, remember, you're holding a thread that stretches back to the dawn of civilization. The Sumerians didn't just invent writing and the wheel, they built an entire economy on beer, proving that even the most mundane human needs can become the foundation of something extraordinary. Cheers to that! Long before chess or backgammon existed, the Sumerians were rolling dice and moving pieces across the most mysterious board game in history, one that decided far more than just bragging rights. The royal game of discovered in the tombs of Mesopotamia's elite, wasn't merely entertainment, it was a sacred tool priests used to peer into the future. Imagine a game so powerful, its outcome could determine whether a king went to war or a city faced famine. This wasn't just play, it was prophecy carved into lapis lazuli and shell. The game's design alone hinted at its supernatural purpose. Exquisitely crafted boards, some inlaid with precious stones, featured 20 squares arranged in a winding pattern, flanked by rosettes considered portals to the divine. Players raced their pieces from one end to the other, but the real drama lay in the dice tetrahedral knucklebones that seemed to tumble with celestial intention. Cuneiform tablets from Babylon, written nearly 1,000 years after the game's invention, preserved its rules alongside chilling instructions. Certain rolls were omens. Landing on a rosette might signal a god's favor, while a series of unlucky moves could spell disaster. What's fascinating is how seriously these predictions were taken. Archaeologists found game boards buried with kings, suggesting the dead might need its magic in the afterlife. One tablet describes a priest interpreting a match's outcome to advise a ruler on whether to marry, a high-stakes use of what we'd now call chance. But to the Sumerians, nothing was random. The gods spoke through every roll, every piece's advance or retreat. Even the colors of the squares held meaning: red for danger, blue for wisdom, white for purity. Modern reconstructions reveal just how sophisticated the game was. Researchers like Irving Finkel at the British Museum decoded its rules from fragmented manuals, allowing enthusiasts today to play it as the Sumerians did. Yet the true thrill lies in those moments when the ancient and modern collide, when a player in the 21st century rolls the dice and feels a flicker of what the priests of must have sensed, that somewhere between strategy and fate, the universe might just be whispering its secrets. So next time you settle in for a game night, spare a thought for the Sumerians. They turned a wooden board into a bridge between worlds, proving that sometimes the oldest games hold the deepest mysteries. After all, who's to say the roll of a die isn't still a message waiting to be read? Among the most startling entries in ancient Sumerian medical texts is a remedy that would make any modern doctor recoil: licking a patient's eyeballs to cure disease. Clay tablets from the city of Nippur detail this exact prescription, instructing healers to use their own saliva as a treatment for eye infections. At first glance, it seems like pure superstition, a bizarre ritual with no grounding in reality. But dig deeper and you'll find a twisted logic at work. The Sumerians believed saliva held divine power, a sacred fluid capable of driving out illness. To them, a healer's breath and spit weren't just biological, they were charged with the energy of the gods, a direct conduit for healing magic. What makes this even more jarring is the contrast with their otherwise sophisticated medical knowledge. The same tablets that prescribe eyeball licking also contain remarkably advanced herbal remedies: poultices of crushed seeds, fermented willow bark for pain, a precursor to aspirin, and even antiseptic washes made from alcohol and honey. One text from describes a wound cleaning technique so precise it rivals early modern surgery. So why the duality? Because the Sumerians saw no contradiction between science and the supernatural. To them, illness wasn't just a physical affliction, it was the work of demons, and fighting it required both herbs and holy spit. The ritual itself was likely as gruesome as it sounds. Cuneiform instructions describe the healer, often a priest-physician reciting incantations to Enki, god of wisdom, while performing the act. The patient would tilt their head back, and the healer would draw their tongue across the infected eye, believed to transfer protective energy. Archaeologists have even found ivory carvings depicting the act, suggesting it wasn't rare. But here's the unsettling twist: modern research reveals they might have stumbled onto something. Human saliva contains compounds like lysozyme, a natural antibacterial agent, and opiofen, a painkiller stronger than morphine. Was it effective? Probably not for serious infections. But in a world before antibiotics, even a slight chance of relief was worth the horror. This duality defines Sumerian medicine. A single healer might grind medicinal herbs with mortar and pestle by morning, then chant over a clay figurine of a demon by night. Their pharmacies stocked everything from frankincense to fermented dairy, while their spells invoked the moon god Inanna to unwrap the bandages of darkness from a patient's eyes. It wasn't ignorance, it was a worldview where every cough, every fever was a battle on two fronts, the physical and the unseen. So next time you wince at the thought of eyeball licking, remember, the Sumerians were grasping for solutions in a world they couldn't yet fully explain. Their cures might seem outrageous now, but they were laying the groundwork for medicine itself, one uncomfortable lick at a time. For the Sumerians, the future wasn't written in the stars, it was carved into the liver of a freshly sacrificed sheep. This practice, known as hepatoscopy or extispasy, was no crude superstition. It was a highly systematized form of divination, a sacred science that required years of training to master. Priests would carefully slit open a sheep's abdomen, remove its liver, and scrutinize every bump, groove, and discoloration as if reading a celestial map. What seems grotesque to us was to them a direct line to the gods, a fleshy oracle holding the answers to war, famine, and royal succession. The precision of their methods is astonishing. Archaeologists have uncovered dozens of clay liver models, intricate replicas used to train new priests. These artifacts, some dating back to 2000 BC, are etched with cuneiform labels marking over 30 distinct zones, each linked to a specific deity or cosmic force. The gallbladder might signal Enlil's anger, while an irregularity near the lobe could mean Inanna's favor. One famous model from Mari even includes annotations like, "If the portal vein is forked, the king will defeat his enemies," proof that this was less guesswork than a rigid diagnostic system. What's truly remarkable is how widespread it became. Tablets from Babylon to Assyria reference Sumerian liver omens, adapted and expanded over centuries. The ritual itself was a spectacle. The animal, always healthy and unblemished, was led to a rooftop altar at dawn. After slaughter, the Baru Sia priest would wash the liver in beer, anoint it with oil, and chart its features against the clay models. Every detail mattered: the texture of the membrane, the curvature of lobes, even the way blood pooled in crevices. A single anomaly could send ripples through an empire. But why the liver? The Sumerians saw it as the body's command center, the seat of emotion and life force. Unlike the heart or brain, it regenerated, a metaphor for cyclical renewal, and its complex structure mirrored the chaos and order of the universe. Modern science confirms their intuition in an unexpected way. The liver does indeed filter toxins, acting as the body's literal protector. Their zones may seem arbitrary, but mapping them allowed priests to standardize interpretations, turning intuition into a repeatable practice. Surviving omen texts read like medical journals crossed with prophecy. One warns of a king's downfall if the liver lacks a pyramid lobe, while another promises bounty when the impression of the sun god's finger appears near the cystic duct. The sheer volume of records suggests this wasn't fringe activity, it was statecraft. Kings delayed battles, merchants cancelled voyages, and treaties were signed or shredded based on a sheep's entrails. The legacy of hepatoscopy lingers in odd places. Etruscan bronze livers, Roman haruspices, even the Hebrew Bible's references to divining by the liver all trace back to Sumer. In a way, they were pioneers of pattern recognition, trying to impose order on a terrifyingly unpredictable world. So while we might chuckle at the idea of liver reading today, ask yourself, how different is it really from staring at tea leaves or stock market charts? The tools change, but the human hunger to know what's coming remains the same. In the shadowy corners of Sumerian temples, priests performed a ritual so potent it could allegedly strike down enemies without a single drop of blood being spilled. They called it the curse of the nails, an act of supernatural warfare where hatred took physical form. Here's how it worked. A clay or bronze statue of the targeted foe would be crafted, their name etched into its surface alongside vicious incantations. Then, with ceremonial solemnity, a priest would drive nails or pegs through the effigy's limbs, eyes, or mouth. each puncture symbolizing a crippling blow to the actual person. The most infamous examples, the cursed nails of Naram-Sin, the Akkadian king who ruled centuries after Sumer's peak but clung to their dark arts. Archaeologists unearthed these chilling artifacts at Nippur, bronze spikes hammered into figurines, their accompanying tablets promising ruin to anyone who defied the king's authority. But this wasn't mere vandalism. Every step was steeped in ritual precision. The nails themselves were often inscribed with spells, transforming them from simple metal into vessels of divine wrath. Tablets from the period outline the exact phrases to chant. Just as this nail is bent and twisted, so too shall be the limbs of my enemy, or as this figure's tongue is pierced, may his speech turn to ash. The symbolism was visceral, a literal binding of the victim's fate. Some effigies were even buried beneath temple thresholds or city gates, ensuring the cursed would unknowingly trample their own likeness daily, amplifying the magic. The genius of this practice lay in its adaptability. Over centuries, it evolved beyond personal vendettas into political weaponry. When the Babylonians rose to power, they adopted the ritual, using it to threaten rebellious cities. A clay nail from Sippar warns, "Whoever removes this inscription, may the gods tear out his foundations like a weed." Even the Assyrians, history's brutal conquerors, feared its power. Their kings would send cursed nails ahead of armies to weaken enemy morale. The message was clear. Resistance wasn't just feudal, it was cosmically doomed. Modern excavations reveal how widespread this terror became. At Gersu, archaeologists found a trove of peg figurines with their heads ritually broken off, a symbolic decapitation. In a clay dog was discovered with nails through its paws, likely cursing a thief to stumble. But perhaps the most haunting evidence comes from Mari, where a statue was found with its eyes gouged by nails, still bearing the cuneiform curse. "Blind them as I blind this image, and let their path end in darkness." What's chilling is how scientifically meticulous the Sumerians were about their magic. They didn't just hurl curses at random, they catalogued them. Libraries held manuals listing which nail placements correlated with specific afflictions: knees for crippling, throats for silence, genitals for sterility. It was a grim taxonomy of suffering, blending psychology and superstition. A victim who learned of the curse might indeed sicken from stress, making the magic self-fulfilling. The legacy of these nails stretches further than you'd think. Greek katadsmoi binding spells, Roman depictions, even medieval European witch bottles, all descend from Sumer's brutal innovation. Today, we dismiss such acts as primitive, but their essence lingers. Ever heard of voodoo dolls? The instinct to harm a representation of one's enemy is ancient, persistent, and unnervingly human. The Sumerians simply had the audacity to systemize it, to make hatred an exact science. So the next time you hammer a nail into a wall, pause. For a fleeting second, you're holding 5,000 years of dark tradition in your hand. In the hushed chambers of Sumerian temples, childless couples knelt before a clay jar not to fetch water, but to pull a new life into their family. This was adoption, Sumerian style, a ritual so symbolic it blurred the line between law and miracle. Cuneiform tablets from Nippur and detail these extraordinary ceremonies, where infants were officially born from vessels, their status as heirs cemented with the same gravity as biological children. One contract from 2000 BC spells it out plainly. "As this child is drawn from the jar of Enlil, so shall they inherit my lands and my name." The process was anything but casual. First, the couple would petition the temple, proving their means to support a child. Then, during a ceremony brimming with incantations, the high priest would place the infant inside a wide-mouthed jar, sometimes decorated with carvings of the fertility goddess Ninhursag, and guide the adoptive parent's hands to lift the baby out. This act wasn't theater, it was legal theater. The jar symbolized the womb of the gods, transforming the child's origin story with divine approval. Surviving contracts even specify penalties if the parents later favored biological offspring over the jar-born, showing how seriously these bonds were taken. What's striking is the sophistication of the legal framework. Tablets outline inheritance shares down to the last barley sheaf, with clauses protecting children if adoptive parents died prematurely. One from Lagash describes a couple adopting twins, an exceptionally rare find, and includes provisions for dividing property equally. Another mandates the child care for the parents in old age, blending filial duty with contractual obligation. These weren't handshake agreements, they were filed in temple archives alongside tax records and land deeds. The symbolism ran deeper than paperwork. Jars in Mesopotamia weren't just containers, they represented abundance and creation myths. Enki, the god of wisdom, was said to have fashioned humans from clay, making the jar adoption a reenactment of primordial magic. Some vessels were even inscribed with blessings. May this child be as sturdy as fired earth, as radiant as glazed tile. Archaeologists have found fragments of these ritual jars in abandoned temples, their interiors still stained with olive oil, likely used to anoint the infants during ceremonies. But here's the twist: some jar children were actually biological relatives. Tablets from Sippar reveal cases where infertile couples adopted nieces or nephews this way, using the ritual to sidestep societal stigma. By reframing the relationship as divinely ordained, they shielded the child from whispers of illegitimacy. Other records hint at temple intermediaries arranging adoptions for abandoned babies, proving the Sumerians tackled social issues with both pragmatism and pageantry. The legacy of these jars echoes in surprising places. Roman olla adoptions, where children were passed over hearth fires in pots, and even folklore tropes of babies found in baskets might trace roots to Sumer's ingenious solution to parenthood. It was more than legal innovation, it was alchemy, turning longing into legacy through the simplest of objects. So the next time you see a clay pot, remember, 5,000 years ago, it might have held not grain but a future, lifted gently into the light by waiting hands. Long before lipstick became a modern beauty staple, the Sumerians were grinding gemstones into vibrant pigments and mixing them with animal fat to create the world's first known lip color. This wasn't vanity, it was a sacred act, a way to honor the gods while signaling one's place in society. The proof: Queen Puabi's tomb in Ur, where archaeologists discovered intricately carved shells still caked with traces of red ochre and white lead, their interiors carefully scooped out to hold the precious mixtures. These weren't just cosmetic containers, they were artifacts of a culture that saw beauty and divinity as inseparable. What makes these ancient cosmetics extraordinary is their sophistication. Analysis of residue reveals Sumerians didn't just use any red pigment, they favored rare, expensive materials like crushed hematite for deep crimson hues and ground malachite for green accents, blending them with rendered sheep fat to create a smooth, long-lasting balm. Texts from Mari describe merchants traveling as far as Afghanistan to procure the finest pigments, while temple records list lip paint among offerings to Inanna, suggesting even gods appreciated a bold pout. The gender norms around these cosmetics might surprise modern audiences. Men of high status, especially priests and rulers, wore lip color as proudly as women, often pairing it with kohl-rimmed eyes and perfumed oils. A surviving statue of Gudea, ruler of Lagash, shows his lips distinctly tinted, while legal tablets mention fines for scribes who smudged their lip paint on official documents. This wasn't mere decoration, the shade one wore communicated power. Dark red signaled authority, likely why Queen Puabi was buried with multiple shades, while pale pinks were for youthful initiates in temple ceremonies. Queen Puabi's cosmetics tell a particularly vivid story. Her funerary shells, carved from exotic conch and inlaid with lapis lazuli, contained not just pigment but tiny ivory applicators, evidence of a meticulous daily ritual. Forensic analysis shows her preferred blend included shimmering crushed pearls, creating a glittering effect unseen elsewhere in Mesopotamia. Perhaps most telling is how these were placed in her tomb, not tucked away with jewelry, but positioned near her face as if ready for use in the afterlife. For Puabi, beauty wasn't just for the living, it was eternal. The legacy of Sumerian cosmetics lingers in unexpected places. Their use of lead-based whites foreshadowed Elizabethan cerus, while their gemstone-crushing techniques resemble modern mineral makeup. Even the word cosmetic finds roots in their practices, the Akkadian term kapru, to adorn echoes in Greek kosmetikos. So next time you swipe on lipstick, remember, you're participating in a 5,000-year tradition that began when ingenious Sumerians first mixed crushed jewels with fat, turning their faces into canvases of both art and devotion. At the summit of Etemenanke, Babylon's legendary ziggurat, priests performed a ritual so peculiar it challenges every modern assumption about worship. They didn't just offer gold or incense to the gods, they ceremoniously deposited food, drink, and precious oils into a toilet. Not a metaphor, not a euphemism, an actual flushable toilet, ingeniously designed to carry offerings away as if they were waste. Archaeologists excavating the ruins of this towering structure discovered terracotta pipes leading from the shrine's inner sanctum, descending through the ziggurat's core in a spiraling drainage system. This wasn't faulty plumbing, it was theology in motion. The mechanics were startlingly advanced. The toilet itself, carved from smooth bitumen-coated brick, connected to a vertical shaft that funneled offerings down to the base of the ziggurat where they'd collect in ritual pits. Cuneiform tablets describe the process in eerie detail. Priests would pour honeyed wine into the bowl while chanting, "As this flows downward, may the gods above receive its essence." The logic: Sumerians believed deities existed in a purified, inverted realm where physical objects became spiritual sustenance when discarded. By flushing offerings, they mimicked the gods' own consumption, transforming a sewer into a sacred conduit. But here's what's truly ingenious: the system doubled as early crowd control. During festivals, thousands ascended the ziggurat's ramps. Excavations reveal secondary pipes branching off to public latrines, proof the priest had engineered Mesopotamia's first known sewage network. The divine toilet's drain even featured a filtration system, layers of charcoal and sand to strain solids, ensuring only liquids reached the offering pits below. It was ecological pragmatism disguised as ritual, a blend of superstition and sanitation that wouldn't reappear in Europe for over 3,000 years. The symbolism ran deeper than hygiene. In the Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation epic, the god Marduk slays chaos by flushing the primordial sea into the underworld. The ziggurat's toilet reenacted this myth daily, with priests playing Marduk's role. Even the materials whispered of cosmic order. The bitumen lining the bowl was identical to that sealing royal tombs, linking disposal to the afterlife. And those ritual pits at the base, they weren't mere cesspools. Texts from Sippar described temple slaves collecting the filtered liquids to rebury in sacred fields, closing a loop where waste nourished crops that had later become new offerings. Modern reconstructions reveal the system's sophistication. Using ground-penetrating radar, researchers traced pipes extending 30 meters below the ziggurat's ruins, some still clogged with residue of ancient offerings. Chemical analysis detected traces of barley beer and sesame oil ingredients listed in temple menus for the gods. But the most haunting find, a gold leaf fragment lodged in a pipe bend, likely from a priest's dropped ornament. Even in failure, the sacred intruded upon the mundane. This ritual toilet upends our view of antiquity's divide between holy and profane. Where we see contradiction worshipped through waste, the Sumerians saw harmony. Every flush reaffirmed their place in the cosmic order, feeding gods through engineering, turning infrastructure into prayer. So next time you use a modern toilet, consider this: 5,000 years ago, someone sat on a ziggurat summit, performing what they believed was the highest act of devotion, letting go. Deep beneath the vaulted ceilings of Sumerian temples lay chambers unlike any other, rooms where the boundary between sleep and revelation dissolved into sacred twilight. These were the dream incubation sanctuaries, spaces so charged with divine presence that simply lying down to rest could attract messages from the gods themselves. The most famous account comes from Gudea, ruler of Lagash, whose 2,000-line dream stele describes how the deity Ningersu visited him in such a chamber, delivering precise architectural instructions for the Inanna temple. The text reads less like a dream journal and more like a celestial contractor's report. The god showed me a brick mold filled with honey. This meant the temple's foundations must include resin for purity. A heavenly donkey pawed the ground. This marked where the gate's pivot stone should be placed. This wasn't passive sleep, it was collaborative creation with the divine. Archaeology confirms how meticulously these spaces were designed. Excavations at Gersu revealed a subterranean complex with raised stone platforms for dreamers, positioned directly beneath ziggurat sanctuaries to catch descending divine energy. Walls were lined with bitumen mixed with crushed lapis lazuli, a material believed to amplify visionary states, while copper braziers burned juniper wood, its smoke thought to thin the veil between worlds. But the real shock came when researchers analyzed residue on the platforms. Traces of ergot fungus, a natural psychoactive, lingered in the porous stone. Whether by sacred chemistry or sheer belief, these chambers were engineered to transform ordinary dreams into holy revelation. The priests didn't leave interpretation to chance. Tablets from Nippur's library contain the world's oldest surviving dream manuals, detailed dictionaries where every symbol carried cosmic weight, rolling a millstone in a dream. The gods will grind your enemies to dust, holding a broken reed. Beware false allies among your scribes. Some entries show startling psychological insight. If a man sees himself flying without wings, his ambitions exceed his station. Others reveal darker fears. Dreaming of teeth falling out predicted family deaths, while encountering a headless figure meant celestial judgment was imminent. What's fascinating is how democratized this practice became. While kings like Gudea sought grand visions, temple records show ordinary citizens paid barley or silver for overnight stays, seeking answers about marriages, harvests, or illness. A tablet from recounts a merchant's dream where a talking fox led him to a buried cache of copper, and the subsequent ledger proves he indeed dug up metal at that location. Whether coincidence or divine intervention, the system thrived on results. Modern sleep science offers an eerie parallel. The hypnagogic state between wakefulness and sleep is now known to heighten creativity, a neurological echo of what Sumerians called the god's whisper. Even their manual structure mirrors contemporary dream therapy, with symbols categorized by themes of power, loss, and transformation. The real difference. Where we see synapses firing, they saw Ningersu's hand reaching through the stars. So the next time you wake with a vivid dream, consider this: 5,000 years ago, you might have carried it straight to a priest who'd pore over clay tablets to decode your midnight visions. The Sumerians didn't just dream, they built an entire industry around the mystery, proving that humanity's oldest questions often come not in waking hours, but in the sacred dark of a temple chamber where sleep wasn't an end but a doorway. Business contracts in ancient Sumer didn't end with a signature or a handshake, they concluded with a ceremonial shattering of silver, a ritual so binding it turned broken cups into legal dinner. Archaeologists digging through the ruins of Lhasa uncovered the smoking gun, fragments of crushed silver vessels, each etched with cuneiform markings that matched merchant contracts line for line. This wasn't vandalism, it was the ultimate failsafe. When two parties struck a deal, whether trading 500 bushels of barley or leasing a fleet of donkeys, They drink date wine from an engraved silver cup, then hurl it to the ground with enough force to fracture it irreparably. The logic: if either side later disputed the agreement, the shattered pieces could be reassembled like a jigsaw puzzle of accountability, proving the original terms beyond doubt. The sophistication of this system becomes clear when examining the fragments themselves. Chemical analysis reveals each cup was alloyed uniquely, some with trace copper, others with a dash of arsenic, creating a metallic fingerprint. One particularly well-preserved shard from Lassa's marketplace bears the clause, "The bearer of the largest fragment shall forfeit 3 female slaves if the barley isn't delivered by the new moon." This wasn't just symbolism, it was forensic-level contract enforcement. Even the act of drinking held legal weight. Tablets describe the wine as the blood of Shamash, god of justice, implying that oath breakers would suffer divine retribution long before human courts got involved. But why silver? Beyond its intrinsic value, silver held sacred significance. The metal was associated with Sin, the moon god, whose cyclical nature mirrored the Sumerian ideal of balanced reciprocity. By destroying something precious together, both parties demonstrated mutual vulnerability, a far cry from today's sterile notarizations. Merchants took this so seriously that excavators found some shards wrapped in linen and buried beneath household thresholds, suggesting families preserved these fragments for generations as proof of ancestral agreements. The ritual's brilliance lay in its psychological impact. Unlike clay tablets that could be altered or lost, a smashed cup was permanently transformed. Temple records from describe disputes where judges demanded the cup's voice, the reassembled vessel, be brought before them like a witness. One tablet recounts a case where a missing fragment proved a trader had secretly modified terms, resulting in his public flogging. It was theater, forensics, and divine law rolled into one act of calculated destruction. Modern parallels abound, from severed tally sticks in medieval Europe to blockchain's immutable ledgers. Humanity keeps reinventing ways to make agreements unbreakable. But the Sumerians did it first, turning a drinking vessel into something far more potent, a physical embodiment of trust, destined to be broken so the contract itself could remain whole. History's first financial fraud wasn't committed with complex algorithms or offshore accounts. It was scribbled onto clay tablets with promises too good to be true. In the bustling markets of around 2000 BC, a scheme unfolded so familiar it could have been ripped from today's headlines. Cuneiform records detail how a group of merchants lured investors with the ultimate bait: "Lend us your barley now and reap sixfold at harvest." For a society built on agriculture, this was the equivalent of a guaranteed lottery win, except the only ones winning were the con artists running what we'd now recognize as a textbook Ponzi scheme. The mechanics were shamelessly simple. Early investors received those outrageous returns, paid not from profits but from the barley deposits of new victims. Temple archives from the period show how the scam snowballed. One tablet lists a widow who mortgaged her date orchard to invest, while another records a priest diverting temple grain reserves into the scheme. The fraudsters even issued clay certificates stamped with official-looking seals, an ancient version of fake stock certificates, but as harvest season approached, the truth surfaced. Excavated legal tablets from document the collapse. The silver is gone, the barley is gone, and the men who promised abundance have vanished like smoke. What's chilling is how modern their tactics were. The ringleaders exploited two timeless human weaknesses: greed and social proof. Tablets describe testimonials from early investors paraded through the city square, their newfound wealth displayed in imported textiles and jewelry. One merchant's contract even included a clause forbidding investors from discussing returns with outsiders, a dead ringer for modern NDAs used by fraudulent investment clubs. Archaeologists found evidence the scammers targeted specific demographics: widows with inheritance windfalls, young heirs unfamiliar with commerce, and temple officials hungry for extra funds to maintain ziggurats. The aftermath reads like a financial crime thriller. Courts scrambled to recover losses, seizing the fraudsters' property. A trove of tablets from Umma details the auctioning of their homes, with proceeds distributed to victims at a fraction of what they'd lost. But the real bombshell: some perpetrators faced a punishment far worse than fines. A legal stele from Isin decrees that one ringleader was bound to the Great Gate for 7 days, his crimes inscribed upon his chest, a brutal early example of white-collar crime deterrence. Yet the most revealing artifact isn't a tablet or verdict, it's a humble cylinder seal. Discovered near Ur's docks, it bears the inscription, "Trust in E, but count your measures twice." This wasn't just folk wisdom, it was hard-won lesson etched into stone by a society that learned the hard way. If an offer sounds too good to be true, it probably was even 4,000 years ago. The echoes are unmistakable. From tulip mania to Bernie Madoff, humanity keeps relearning the same painful lesson. The Sumerians just had the dubious honor of inventing not only writing and law, but history's first documented financial scam. Their clay tablets stand as a warning across millennia. The language of fraud never really changes, only the clay it's written on. In the dusty archives of Nippur, archaeologists unearthed something unexpectedly tender: clay bricks bearing the tiny footprints of newborns, each pressed into the surface alongside carefully inscribed cuneiform text. These weren't mere keepsakes, they were official birth certificates, Sumerian style. Imagine a world where your earliest legal document wasn't paper filed in some government office, but your own footprint immortalized in clay, baked hard enough to survive 5,000 years. Dozens of these birth bricks have been found, some even naming the midwives who ushered these babies into the world, a rare nod to women's labor in a male-dominated record-keeping system. The process was as methodical as it was poignant. After a successful birth, a wet brick of local clay would be prepared, its surface smoothed by hand. The infant's foot, often just the right sole, would be gently pressed into the soft surface, leaving an imprint so precise modern researchers can sometimes estimate the baby's weight. Then a scribe would inscribe details around it: the child's given name, parentage, date calculated by the reigning king's regnal year, and occasionally even astrological omens noted during the birth. One particularly well-preserved brick from around 2000 BC reads, "In the year King Inanna rebuilt the temple of Enlil under the auspices of the rising moon, was born Amagula, daughter of Lunana. Her midwife shall be known as Ninkala the Wise." What's remarkable is how these bricks functioned as multi-purpose documents. They served as proof of lineage for inheritance claims. Temple records show disputes where adult plaintiffs presented their birth bricks to prove royal or priestly ancestry. Others were used to track population growth. Bricks from the same year often share similar clay composition, suggesting batches were made for census purposes. But the most surprising revelation came when scholars noticed some bricks bore tiny handprints alongside footprints. These, it turns out, were for stillbirths or infants who died shortly after delivery, a heartbreaking attempt to ensure even brief lives were counted in the cosmic ledger. The midwife acknowledgements offer a rare glimpse into women's professional roles. While most Sumerian records highlight male scribes and officials, these bricks preserve names like Nindam the Gentle or Zagti of the Steady Hands, women who clearly commanded enough respect to be memorialized in clay. Some bricks even list their fees, usually in wool or barley, giving us the first known payroll records for maternity care. One from details a midwife receiving 2 jars of honey and a copper ring for delivering a merchant's twins. Modern forensic techniques have teased out even more secrets. Spectral imaging on bricks at the University of Chicago revealed faint fingerprints alongside the footprints, likely the midwife's hand steadying the baby during the impression. Residue analysis detected traces of amniotic fluid and olive oil, suggesting ritual anointing before imprinting, and the clay itself tells a story. Bricks from wealthy families used finer, sifted clay with bitumen additives for durability, while commoners' bricks contained straw fragments, echoes of the biblical slaves, bricks without straw millennia before Exodus. These humble artifacts append assumptions about ancient bureaucracy. Where we'd expect cold administrative records, the Sumerians created objects brimming with humanity. Each brick is a snapshot of a single moment, a squirming newborn, a proud midwife, a parent's hope etched in cuneiform. They understood what we often forget, that the driest legal documents still pulse with lives lived. So next time you glance at your own birth certificate, think of those tiny sun-baked footprints. The medium changes, but the message remains the same: proof that someone, 5,000 years ago or today, wanted the world to know you were here. In the dim glow of Sumerian taverns, worshippers didn't just drink beer. They communed with the divine through the most unexpected of vessels, a massive ceramic vagina. Archaeologists excavating these ancient pubs uncovered reliefs depicting revelers kneeling before the yawning opening of a sculpted female form, sipping frothy beer through long golden straws. This wasn't mere bawdy art, it was the sacred embodiment of Ninkasi, the beer goddess, whose very body was believed to ferment the intoxicating brew. The symbolism was as literal as it was profound. Just as a mother births life, Ninkasi's womb gave birth to beer, transforming humble grains into liquid divinity. The rituals surrounding these vessels reveal a startling blend of reverence and revelry. Surviving hymns describe priestesses chanting over the ceramic forms, pouring barley mash into the opening while invoking Ninkasi's flowing lap. One particularly vivid tablet from details how worshippers would stroke the vessel's exterior during droughts, begging the goddess to open wide and release her intoxicating waters as a metaphor for rain. The straws themselves were ceremonial objects, some over 6 feet long, crafted from precious metals and inlaid with lapis to resemble the veins of the earth. Drinking through them wasn't just practical, avoiding sediment at the vessel's base. It was a sacred act, as if drawing nourishment directly from the goddess's life force. What makes these artifacts even more extraordinary is their scientific underpinning. Modern analysis shows the ceramic vaginas weren't random shapes. Their interiors were grooved with spiral ridges mimicking fallopian tubes, designed to trap yeast during fermentation. Residue studies confirm they functioned as actual brewing vats, with traces of archaic wheat and date sugars clinging to the porous clay. The Sumerians had essentially engineered a biomimetic fermentation system, unknowingly harnessing the same lactobacillus bacteria found in human birth canals to culture their beer. To them, this wasn't chemistry, it was the goddess literally impregnating the brew with life. The mythology behind the practice is even more surreal. The hymn to Ninkasi, inscribed on a tablet circa 1800 BC, describes beer's creation as a cosmic gynecological event. From your vulva poured the ferment, like a roaring bull it surges. Another text from Nippur compares drunkards to children suckling at the mother's red pubis, while tavern receipts list payments to priestesses for activating the goddess's opening, likely referring to ritualized stirring of the mash. Even the straws carried sexual connotations. Cylinder seals show them thrust rhythmically into the vessel's mouth, a ceremonial reenactment of divine conception. Yet for all its startling imagery, the practice held deep ecological wisdom. The vaginal vessels were always buried up to their waists in cool earth, regulating temperature like Mesopotamian refrigerators. Their placement in taverns' neutral ground where kings and laborers drank side by side made them great social equalizers. A broken specimen from Eridu still bears cuneiform graffiti. Whoever drinks here forgets whether he is slave or noble. Perhaps the most poignant evidence comes from Mari, where excavators found a burial containing both a ceremonial straw and a miniature ceramic vagina clutched in the deceased's hands, a funerary plea for eternal intoxication. It's a reminder that the Sumerians saw no divide between the sacred and the sensual, between biology and transcendence. Their beer wasn't just a drink, It was the liquid offspring of a goddess, bestowing both drunken joy and spiritual rebirth, one long, golden sip at a time. While we tap snooze on our smartphones, the Sumerians were jolting awake to history's first mechanical alarm, a water clock so precise it could measure the nights passing to within minutes. Picture this: in the torchlit courtyards of night watchmen leaned over a peculiar vessel called a clepsydra, its belly slowly draining as the hours crept by. Floating atop the water was a wooden marker, rigged to trip a bronze hammer when it sank low enough, sending a metallic clang reverberating through the darkness. This wasn't just a timekeeper, it was an ancient graveyard shift's lifeline, a way to segment the unpredictable Mesopotamian night into measurable, manageable slices. The engineering behind these clocks reveals a sophistication that defies their simplicity. Excavated fragments from Nippur show cylindrical clay vessels tapered at the base like an hourglass, their interiors scored with spiral grooves to regulate water flow. But here's the genius: Sumerian mathematicians accounted for seasonal changes. Tablets from the city of Lhasa contain calculations proving they adjusted the water volume based on the time of year, less in winter when nights were longer, more in summer when darkness fled quickly. One particularly intricate tablet, now in the Louvre, even graphs the varying water levels needed month by month, correlating them to stellar movements with eerie accuracy. These weren't approximations, they were lunar algorithms carved in clay. What's truly astonishing is how they standardized time across professions. A dispatch tablet from a night patrol in Uruk records guards changing shifts when the night's third bowl sounds, proof these alarms coordinated entire cities. Another from a temple brewery lists fermentation stages timed to the clepsydra's strikes. After 7 measures of water, the mash shall be stirred. Even the famous epic of Gilgamesh hints at their cultural impact, comparing the hero's restless nights to a watchman's bowl that will not toll, the real smoking gun. Archaeologists found a partially intact clepsydra in the ruins of Eridu, its bronze hammer still poised above a dented strike plate. Residue analysis revealed something unexpected: traces of lotus oil in the water. Texts confirm this was intentional. Priests believed the sacred scent carried time's essence to the gods. Every droplet wasn't just counting minutes, it was a fragrant prayer against the chaos of endless night. Modern experiments with reconstructed clocks show their precision was no fluke. Using the Sumerians' own calculations, historians at Oxford recreated a clepsydra that kept time within a 10-minute margin over 8 hours. A feat unmatched until medieval Europe. The secret lay in their obsessive calibration. Tablets from Sippar's scribble schools contain endless practice problems. If the bowl strikes when 6 fingers of water remain, and the night watch is 8 hours, how much must the vessel hold? This was math in service of societal order, turning abstract numbers into the rhythm of waking, guarding, and working. So next time your alarm blares at dawn, remember, the impulse to regiment time isn't modern. It's as old as civilization itself, born from watchmen in reed armor staring into the Mesopotamian dark, waiting for that bronze bowl to sing, marking another hour survived, another fragment of chaos tamed. The Sumerians didn't just invent the clock, they gave us the very idea that time could be harnessed, measured, and yes, even dreaded when its toll came calling. In the shadowy corners of Sumerian marketplaces, a chilling transaction unfolded, one where currency wasn't silver or barley, but human flesh and blood. When a debtor stood at the brink of enslavement, cuneiform contracts reveal a gut-wrenching alternative. They could offer their own family members as substitutes. Tablets from Lagash lay bare these negotiations in cold, clinical detail, a father weighing whether his eldest son's labor was worth 10 shekels of debt, a wife pleading to be taken instead of their sickly daughter. This wasn't just indentured servitude, it was a macabre marketplace of familial sacrifice, where love and survival collided in the ink of scribes. The contracts themselves read like horror stories dressed in bureaucracy. One from the reign of King Inanna details a man named Lama who owed 30 measures of barley, roughly a year's wages. The tablet coolly records his choice. Let my wife Shara Iltum enter the house of Lugal Anda for 3 harvests, and the debt shall be washed away like spring rain. What the dry language conceals is the desperation beneath. Archaeologists found similar documents with fingernail scratches near signatures, as if hands had trembled while pressing seals into clay. Worse still were the clauses allowing masters to extend the term if the substitute falls ill, trapping families in cycles of perpetual obligation. But why did this loophole exist? At its core, it reflected Sumer's obsession with economic stability. Debt slavery threatened to remove productive laborers from circulation, while family substitutions kept debtors working as their kin served. Temple records from Gersu show priests even encouraged the practice, framing it as piety. Is it not nobler to offer one limb than lose the whole body? A twisted echo of later religious sacrifices, the math was brutal but logical. A healthy wife or child could work decades, while an overburdened debtor might perish in years. The psychological toll surfaces in unexpected places. Letters between merchants reference debtors who howl like dogs at the moon after transactions, while medical tablets describe a recurring illness called the creditor's shadow, sleeplessness and shaking hands attributed to guilt. Even the language betrayed the trauma. The verb for to substitute, subber, also meant to tear, as if acknowledging the familial fabric being ripped apart. Yet some turn the system against itself. A cunning tablet from Umma reveals a widow who bargained her abusive son-in-law into servitude to cancel her debts, while another shows children conspiring to get themselves sold to wealthy patrons as a path out of poverty. The most heartbreaking artifacts are miniature clay dolls found in household shrines, crude figures of missing family members, some with real hair woven into them, left as offerings to household gods for protection. The legacy of these contracts haunts more than just history books. Modern debt bondage in places like South Asia mirrors Sumer's grim calculus, proving how easily human dignity becomes negotiable when survival hangs in the balance. Those clay tablets aren't just records, they're mirrors, reflecting a truth we've never fully escaped. That poverty has always demanded its pound of flesh, and the scales rarely tip toward mercy. Beneath the scorching Mesopotamian sun, kings didn't just rule from gilded thrones. They proved their divine right in the most visceral way imaginable, by hurtling through chariot races where survival was the ultimate testament to heavenly favor. The standard of that iconic mosaic inlaid with lapis lazuli and shell, captures the brutal spectacle in staggering detail. One panel shows a ruler's chariot, wheels splintered, horses rearing in terror while crowds roar approval, not at the finish line but at the wreckage itself. This wasn't sport, it was a ritual where monarchs flirted with death to demonstrate their gods-given invincibility. The rules of these races were as precise as they were lethal. Tablets from Nippur's archives describe a grueling 12-lap circuit around the city's ziggurat, each turn sharper than the last. Kings didn't merely compete, they drove alone without reins, gripping the chariot rail with one hand while clutching a scepter in the other, a literal balancing act of sovereignty and survival. The real kicker, courses were strewn with debris, broken pottery, scattered bones. To maximize chaos, a royal hymn from Lagash brags how King Inanna let the dust of 7 crashes cloak his brow before victory, suggesting near-death experiences were part of the resume. Archaeology confirms how deadly this pageantry was. Excavations at Ur's royal cemetery revealed chariots buried with their axles, deliberately weakened training vehicles designed to snap during practice, hardening future kings to catastrophe. One preserved wreck showed ingenious sacrificial construction. Leather straps meant to tear away during crashes, sparing the driver's legs, but the most chilling finds are the skeletal remains. A tomb near Kish contained a ruler interred with 12 horses, one for each lap he'd supposedly survived, their vertebrae showing fractures from repeated collisions. The crowds played their own bloodthirsty role. Unlike Roman circuses where the masses decided fates, Sumerian spectators acted as divine witnesses. Texts describe how silence during a crash meant the gods had withdrawn favor, while cheers signaled celestial approval. The standard of Ur's mosaic captures this perfectly. In one tier, attendants tend injured horses, while above them, nobles raise cups not to the living king, but to the smashed chariots behind him. Victory wasn't about crossing the line first, it was about walking away from ruins that should have killed you. What's revealing is how these races mirrored Sumerian cosmology. Just as their gods battled chaos monsters to maintain cosmic order, kings reenacted that struggle by conquering the chaos of the racetrack. A tablet from Uruk quotes a priest's pre-race incantation: "Let Enki's cunning guide your hands, but let Enlil's storms test your worth." Even the debris had meaning. Pottery shards represented shattered enemies. Bones symbolized mortality's ever-present threat. Surviving wasn't luck, it was theology in motion. Modern recreations expose the insane skill required. Historians at Cambridge built replica chariots using period-accurate materials, solid wooden wheels, unspoked and unforgiving. At just 20 miles per hour, a single bump could flip the entire rig. Now imagine 12 laps of that with a scepter in hand and a kingdom's fate resting on your balance. It's no wonder these races became rare, reserved for coronations or droughts when a king had to prove the gods still listened. So the next time you watch a daredevil stunt, remember, the original thrill-seekers wore crowns, not helmets, and their crashes weren't failures, they were the whole point. The Sumerians understood something primal about leadership. True authority isn't just declared, it's earned in the dust and blood of spectacle, where every splintered wheel whispers, "The gods are watching." Even in death, the Sumerians refused to let love or social status remain unfulfilled. Across the excavation sites of Ur and Kish, archaeologists keep uncovering tombs where skeletons rest side by side, their bony fingers adorned with wedding bands that never knew life. These aren't tragic Romeo and Juliet burials, they're evidence of one of history's most peculiar customs, the ghost marriage market. When an unmarried person died, their family could arrange a posthumous union with another deceased individual, complete with dowries, contracts, and even honeymoon provisions for the afterlife. Tablet after tablet spells out these eerie transactions, like one from Lhasa that brokers a match between a drowned merchant's son and a high priest's stillborn daughter, stipulating 30 shekels of silver to be buried with the groom, that he may build a house worthy of his bride in the dark realm. The mechanics of these unions were shockingly bureaucratic. Clay figurines stood in for the dead during ceremonies, their tiny limbs twisted into matrimonial poses, hands clasped, heads tilted together before being sealed in miniature sarcophagi. Dowry contracts, inscribed with the same legalese as living marriages, specified payments in barley, lapis lazuli, and even slaves to accompany the couple underground. One particularly verbose tablet from Nippur includes an afterlife prenup. Should the ghost wife find greater favor in Dumuzi's court, her family shall forfeit 2 bronze vessels to the groom's kin. The attention to detail was staggering. Some contracts listed the exact number of ceremonial meals to be interred, ensuring the spectral newlyweds wouldn't go hungry on their eternal honeymoon. The tombs themselves tell haunting stories. In 2015, a team excavating near Ur found a pair of skeletons, a young man and woman buried with a trove of wedding gifts, a lyre strung with silver wire, alabaster cups still sticky with fermented residue, and 2 clay masks painted with eerily smiling faces. Forensic analysis revealed the shocking truth. The woman had died centuries before the man. His family had exhumed her remains to fulfill a deathbed promise, resealing them beside their son with fresh grave goods. The man's skull showed signs of trepanation, likely a failed attempt to cure whatever killed him, making this not just a love story, but a desperate parental gamble to ease his journey beyond. What drove this macabre matchmaking? Partly economics. Unmarried dead were considered financial liabilities, restless spirits who might curse living relatives for neglecting their social duties. A ghost marriage secured ancestral alliances just like earthly ones, with the added benefit of preventing inheritance disputes. But there was also profound tenderness in the practice. Letters between grieving parents speak of giving our child the companionship death stole from them, while some figurines were found clutched in the hands of skeletons, perhaps buried by elderly parents finally securing a partner for their eternally young son or daughter. The afterlife logistics were meticulously planned. Excavated ghost bride tombs often contained two sets of personal items: his and her cosmetics jars, his spear and her spindle, even gaming boards with pieces poised mid-move, everything needed to continue domestic life underground. One poignant grave from Eridu held a tiny clay crib between the couple, its interior lined with bitumen to symbolize the children they'd now have in eternity. Modern DNA testing has revealed even darker layers. Some paired skeletons show no biological relation, proving strangers were literally dug up and remarried for posthumous social climbing. Other graves show signs of live sacrifices, maidens or servants possibly killed to accompany these ghostly newlyweds. The most chilling find, a tablet from Umma that coldly calculates the cost difference between a virgin ghost bride and a previously married but high-status widow's spirit. This practice wasn't just about death, it was about refusing to let death have the final word. In a civilization where lineage stretched into eternity, even the grave couldn't stop a good match. Those silent skeletons decked in wedding finery remind us how fiercely the Sumerians clung to love, status, and the belief that somewhere in the gloom of the netherworld, two lonely shadows might yet find each other with a little help from the living. 5,000 years before unions and picket signs, the dusty streets of Ur witnessed history's first recorded labor strike, not in shouted slogans but in the meticulous cuneiform of clay tablets. Unearthed from the ruins of temple workshops, these ancient grievance lists reveal a workforce pushed to the brink. The issue, a sudden cut to their most vital compensation, barley and oil rations. One particularly damning tablet, dated to 2400 BC, reads like a Bronze Age protest poster: "We are hungry, yet the granaries groan. Our children cry for oil, yet the jars stand full. Until our bellies are as satisfied as the gods, no brick shall we lay, no loom shall we thread." This wasn't just complaining, it was coordinated action. Dozens of workers, bakers, builders, weavers downed tools simultaneously, paralyzing temple operations for days. The demands were shockingly specific. Tablet 83 from the British Museum's collection itemizes the cuts: from 6 quarts of barley to 4, from 2 of oil to 1. For workers surviving on these rations, this wasn't just austerity, it was starvation math. What's fascinating is how modern their tactics feel. Instead of violence, they weaponized bureaucracy, submitting formal petitions to the NC city governor with careful receipts showing previous allocations. One scribe even calculated the exact caloric deficit. A man cannot lift bricks on fewer than 3,000 grains a day. Another tablet records their leverage, reminding administrators that the upcoming harvest festival required their labor to prepare offerings. The implied threat, "let us starve and the gods might too." Archaeology paints a vivid scene. Excavations near Ur's temple compound uncovered a row of abandoned workbenches, half-formed bricks still bearing fingerprints, looms frozen mid-weave. But the real smoking gun was found beneath a collapsed wall, a hidden cache of tablets workers had buried, likely to preserve their protest's paper trail. Some contained song lyrics, crude couplets urging solidarity. "The fat priest eats honey, we lick clay, stand together, brothers, or kneel forever." Others listed strike captains by name, revealing an organized hierarchy. Foremen like Inanna, the wall builder, emerge as early labor heroes, their titles scratched out and replaced with Speaker of the Hungry. The resolution came straight out of a modern HR handbook. A tablet marked the settlement details concessions, restored rations plus an extra half-quart of barley as back pay. But the real victory was procedural, the creation of history's first documented labor contract. Workers secured quarterly ration audits and the right to elect representatives to inspect granaries. One clause even mandated clean oil, not sediment from the jar's bottom, proving their attention to detail rivaled today's workplace regulations. What makes this strike extraordinary isn't just its antiquity, but its humanity. These weren't faceless laborers, they were parents tallying missing meals, craftsmen bargaining for dignity. When they pressed their seals into those clay tablets, they left more than complaints, they left a message across millennia. Exploitation has always bred resistance, even in the shadow of ziggurats. Their triumph whispers to every worker who's ever demanded fairness, whether in barley or Bitcoin, that the struggle for justice began not in factories, but in the sun-baked courtyards of where the first collective voice rose from the dust. When the king's horn blew across the rooftops of Sumer, every citizen, from potter to priest, knew what it meant. The annual lion hunt had begun, and there was no refusing the call. Unlike the noble pastime of later empires, this was no leisure pursuit for the elite. Cuneiform tablets from Lagash detail a staggering system of mandatory participation, where showing up wasn't optional, it was civic duty enforced with draconian fines. One particularly blunt record lists penalties for a merchant who dared send his slave instead. For each day Dumuzi's face was absent from the hunt, 10 shekels of silver were stripped from his house and his name was struck from the temple rolls. This wasn't sport, it was a blood-soaked ritual of collective survival, where every able body was expected to stand against Mesopotamia's most feared predators. The scale of these hunts comes alive in the bone pits. Excavations near the palace of revealed mass graves containing over 200 lion skeletons, many with arrowheads still wedged between ribs or cleaver marks on vertebrae. Forensic analysis tells a gruesome story. These weren't clean kills. Teeth marks on human remains mixed with the lion bones suggest close-quarters combat, while clay tablets from Mari describe hunters using nets and bronze-tipped spears to corner the beast. The most chilling detail, many lion skulls show healed fractures, proving these animals had survived previous encounters, transforming each hunt into a rematch with adversaries who'd learned to fight back. But why force bakers and scribes into such danger? The answer lies in the politics of fear. Lions weren't just threats to livestock, they were living symbols of chaos, embodiments of the goddess Inanna's wrath. By compelling every household to participate, kings turned the hunt into a brutal bonding exercise, a reminder that survival depended on unity. A hymn from Gudia's reign spells it out. As the lion's jaws snap at one, so shall the enemy descend upon all. The message was clear: skip the hunt today, and tomorrow your neighbors might abandon you to real invaders. The bureaucracy behind these events was astonishing. Temple archives from contain rosters assigning hunting positions based on profession. Potters formed the rear guard, hurling clay noisemakers to panic the lions toward the spearmen. Weavers braided the nets, while brewers were tasked with laying out beer-soaked meat as bait, a grim twist on their usual craft. Even the fines were meticulously graded. Missing the hunt entirely cost 30 shekels, while showing up without proper weapons meant forfeiting a month's grain ration. What's heartbreaking are the personal stories buried in the records. A tablet from Shurapak preserves a widow's plea to exempt her only son, offering her late husband's hunting medals as collateral. Another lists a blind musician who insisted on joining, his role reduced to blowing a warning trumpet when lions neared. These weren't faceless conscripts, they were people clinging to dignity in the face of royal decree. The ecological impact was devastating. Lion bones from early hunts show robust, healthy specimens, while later pits contain younger, smaller animals, evidence of a population pushed to collapse. By the time of Hammurabi, the ritual had become mostly ceremonial, with kings importing lions from distant mountains just to keep the tradition alive. Yet for all its brutality, the hunt's legacy endures in unexpected ways. The Roman venations, medieval beast baiting, even modern wildlife management all trace threads back to Sumer's first war against nature. Those mass graves aren't just bone piles, they're the birth certificates of humanity's fraught relationship with predators, written in tooth and claw and the unyielding clay of bureaucratic obsession. Picture this, a life-sized wooden statue of the storm god Adad, gilded in silver and lapis lazuli, being carried on a litter through the crowded streets of Ur, not for worship, but for divine extortion. The Sumerians perfected what might be history's first supernatural shakedown system, where temple statues became mobile collection agencies armed with celestial threats. Cuneiform donation boxes recovered from Lhasa bear spine-chilling warnings. Whoever withholds silver from the mouth of the god shall find his roof beams cracked by lightning, his granaries emptied by rats, his children's children cursed to wander hungry. This wasn't philanthropy, it was divinely sanctioned coercion where piety and protection money became indistinguishable. The mechanics were as theatrical as they were ruthless. Temple records from Isin describe a rotating schedule where different deities' statues would tour neighborhoods, Enki for merchants' quarter visits during flood season, Inanna for newlyweds districts before marriages. Each statue had a hollowed-out back compartment where offerings could be deposited, often with a funnel leading directly to the god's mouth, a literal feeding the deity spectacle. But here's the psychological masterstroke. Priests would tilt the statues forward if donations were light, making the god's eyes glare directly at reluctant households. One tablet from Nippur recounts how a miserly oil merchant finally capitulated when Shamash's effigy leaned so far it nearly toppled onto his threshold. Refusal carried tangible consequences beyond supernatural threats. Excavated houses in Ur's merchant quarter show an eerie pattern. Homes lacking donation receipts in their archives often had their doorways deliberately widened in later renovations. Why? Because refusing the god's visit got you blacklisted from the neighborhood watch system, leaving you vulnerable to burglars who knew your doors couldn't be barred quickly enough. Even the donation boxes themselves were engineered for intimidation. A specimen from Eridu features a bronze lion's head at the slot offerings had to be pushed past its fangs, a visceral reminder of the divine wrath one risked by holding back. The genius or ruthlessness of this system lay in its adaptability. Drought year, expect more statues touring with empty water jugs conspicuously placed at their feet. After a poor harvest, the fertility goddess Ninlil's statue would be paraded with a hollow belly that rattled audibly unless filled with grain. Some particularly inventive priests even rigged statues with tubes that allowed hidden assistants to make the effigies weep resin tears if donations lagged, a stunt described in a scribe's amused memo as "the crying of Ningal earns 30 shekels an hour." But the darkest revelations come from failed attempts to cheat the system. A tablet from the Temple of Enki in Eridu details the punishment for a baker caught slipping counterfeit copper rings into the donation box. His right hand was placed in the god's mouth for 7 days. Excavators found the very statue involved, its mouth cavity still bearing tooth marks from where the baker's fingers were clamped. Others tried hiding wealth. Forensic archaeology on a merchant's house in Lagash revealed silver coins cemented into a false wall, directly beneath a cuneiform curse tablet reading, "The all-seeing sun god knows what lies buried." What's fascinating is how these statues functioned as early surveillance tools. Many had inlaid rock crystal eyes that caught lamplight eerily, giving worshippers or victims the unsettling sense of being watched even after the procession passed. Temple inventories list repairs to the seeing eyes of Ninurta more frequently than any other feature, proof these weren't just art but psychological weapons. Even their posture was calculated. Gods of justice like Utu were crafted with outstretched arms, looming over donors like a physical manifestation of obligation. The legacy of these divine tax collectors echoes in modern institutions, from the medieval church's indulgence sales to televangelists' donation drives. But the Sumerians did it first, blurring the line between devotion and dues with such effectiveness that even skeptics paid up. After all, when the collector isn't just representing the divine but is literally staring into your soul with lapis lazuli eyes, who's brave enough to call the bluff? Those hollow statues did more than fill temple coffers. They made the intangible weight of heavenly disapproval crushingly, profitably real. History's first celebrity chef wasn't whipping up dishes in some gleaming kitchen. He was pressing recipes into clay with a reed stylus 5,000 years ago, leaving behind flavors so bold they'd challenge even the most adventurous modern palate. Meet Abba, the Julia child of ancient Sumer, whose cuneiform tablets from the city of Mari reveal a culinary mind both ingenious and utterly bizarre. His magnum opus, 25 variations of meat pies, each more elaborate than the last, featuring ingredients that sound like they belong in a wizard's pantry. Locusts ground into paste, fish left to ferment until pungent, even river weeds boiled with precious lapis lazuli dust for color. One remarkably preserved tablet, now in the Louvre, bears the header "For the king's mouth only," a testament to Abba's elite clientele and the sheer extravagance of his creations. Reconstructing one of his recipes is like decoding edible alchemy. Take tablet 19's Dumuzi's Delight, a lamb pie layered with no fewer than 18 ingredients. First, Abba instructs to take one young lamb, fat as the moon on the 14th day, a poetic nod to Sumer's lunar calendar dictating peak tenderness. The meat would be marinated not in wine or herbs, but in a paste of mashed dates, crushed locusts, and sesame oil for 3 days, a combination modern food scientists confirm acts as a natural meat tenderizer. The crust, a mixture of barley flour and water from the second rinsing of beer mash, essentially a sourdough starter avant la lettre. But the real showstopper is the sauce, fermented carp bile mixed with pomegranate molasses, a sweet and bitter glaze that tablets describe as the tears of Inanna, joyful and cruel. The preparation rituals bordered on sacred theater. Abba's notes specify cooking must begin when the sun touches the ziggurate's peak, with the baker facing east to catch Nusaba's goddess of grain blessing. Each pie was pricked exactly 7 times with a bronze needle, not for venting steam, but to release evil spirits trapped in the meat. Even the baking vessel carried symbolism, a 2-handled clay dupu pot shaped like a grazing sheep, its hollow legs allowing heat to circulate like a proto-convection oven. Archaeologists testing replica pots found they reached perfect browning temperature in 30 minutes. Proof Abba's methods were as precise as they were theatrical. What makes these recipes truly revolutionary is their glimpse into Sumerian food science. That fermented fish sauce wasn't just for shock value, it's an early form of garum, the Roman condiment later prized across the Mediterranean. The locust paste, packed with protein and umami, predating modern insect flour trends by millennia. Even the lapis dust had a practical purpose. Its alkaline properties stabilized the vivid safflower dye used to gild crusts for royal banquets. Abba didn't just cook, he pioneered preservation techniques, flavor chemistry, and food presentation in one fell swoop. The most poignant discovery came from Yale's Babylonian collection. A broken tablet lists Abba's students, each name followed by a dish they mastered. The last entry reads simply, "Ninkosi, my daughter keeper of the sourdough, guardian of the sacred ferment." It's a tender footnote in culinary history, proof that 5,000 years ago, a father passed his wooden spoon to the next generation, ensuring that even in a world of fermented fish and crushed locusts, the heart of cooking remained timeless. In the hushed inner sanctum of Ur's great ziggurat, priests performed a ritual so peculiar it bordered on divine dentistry, crafting and fitting silver false teeth for the moon god Inanna's statue. Temple ledgers from the reign of King Shulgi detail payments to jewelers for 2 molars of pure silver, polished to shine like the full moon's glow, along with receipts for regular cleanings using sacred cedar oil and lapis powder. This wasn't just symbolic ornamentation, it was functional prosthetics for a deity whose ivory cult statue had reportedly lost its original teeth, either through age, ritual wear, or perhaps the gnashing demands of celestial authority. The craftsmanship behind these dentures reveals a startling blend of artistry and anatomy. Excavations in Ur's temple workshop uncovered a set of silver molars still tucked inside a linen pouch, their cusps worn smooth from years of ceremonial use. Forensic analysis showed bite marks matching the statue's jawline, proving they weren't mere offerings but custom-fitted replacements, even more astonishing. The teeth were hollow, filled with honey mixed with powdered pearl, a concoction temple texts describe as the god's sweet breath. Every new moon, priests would remove the teeth, refresh the filling, and reinsert them while chanting incantations to restore Inanna's bite against darkness. Nor was alone in this practice. At Lhasa, a copper and obsidian canine tooth was found still screwed into the jaw of a storm god statue, its base inscribed with a warning: "Whoever loosens a dad's fang shall taste his lightning." In Eridu, archaeologists discovered a cache of rejected prototypes, gold premolars deemed too soft for Enki's wisdom chewing, alongside a scribe's frustrated note about the god's unusually square dental alignment. These weren't one-off curiosities, they were part of a sprawling tradition where god statues received the same meticulous care as living royalty. The theological implications were as layered as the silver plating. Tooth loss in humans was seen as a mark of decay and mortality, 2 concepts anathema to immortal beings. By replacing divine dentition, priests weren't just maintaining idols, they were performing metaphysical surgery, reinforcing the god's eternal vigor. A cracked tablet from Nippur's library spells it out. As Inanna's teeth pierce the night sky's veil, so must they remain unbroken. The parallel to human dentistry is eerie. Dental receipts from the same period show wealthy Sumerians commissioning gold wire bridges, suggesting the god's smile set the standard for mortal vanity. But here's the twist. These prosthetics may have doubled as ancient ATMs. Several temple inventories note that the god's teeth were removed during crises and melted down for bullion, only to be replaced when coffers refilled. One ledger from a famine year starkly records paid 3 silver molars to the grain merchants of Elam. The moon god's grin, it seems, was both sacred and liquid, a divine line of credit in times of desperation. The most poignant find, a child's burial in Ur's cemetery containing a crude clay replica of Inanna's teeth, placed beside the skeleton's mouth, a tender attempt to equip a young soul for celestial banquets in the afterlife. In that small gesture, the Sumerians blurred the line between dentistry and devotion, proving even the gods needed a little help to keep biting through eternity. If you think tea leaves or crystal balls are strange ways to predict the future, wait until you hear how the Sumerians turned arson into an art form. In the sacred courtyards of Nippur, priests would douse miniature clay houses with flammable oils, set them ablaze, and stare intently into the rising smoke, not to put out the fire, but to read the swirling patterns like a celestial newspaper. This was house-burning divination, one of the most dangerously creative methods of prophecy ever devised. The Code of Ur-Nammu, humanity's oldest surviving legal text, devotes an entire section to regulating these fiery sessions, warning that any man who burns a dwelling without the seer's license shall be bound and cast into the river. Even in ancient Mesopotamia, playing with fire required paperwork. The ritual's precision was as meticulous as it was terrifying. Excavations at the Temple of Enlil revealed a specialized workshop where priests crafted identical model houses, each 12 inches square with tiny clay furniture and figurines representing the family. Tablets describe anointing these miniatures with oils corresponding to different omens: cedar for wealth prophecies, rancid fat for impending doom, even lotus-infused blends for matters of love. Once ignited, the seers would time the collapse of roof beams. Early meant swift fortune, delayed signaled hardship, and note whether smoke curled left auspicious or right ominous. One particularly vivid account from Lhasa records a priest shouting, "Behold, the smoke forms the horns of Anu," interpreting a billowing plume as the sky god's approval for military action. But why burn houses instead of, say, sheep livers? The answer lies in Sumerian cosmology. Just as earthly homes sheltered families, the universe itself was imagined as a cosmic household where gods dwelled. By ritually destroying a microcosm, priests believed they could glimpse vulnerabilities in the cosmic order. A tablet from Sippar's archives explains, "As the model's walls crack, so too may the walls between worlds thin." The practice peaked during uncertain times. Tablets show surges in house burning rituals before wars, succession crises, or when Jupiter's movements seemed erratic. The legal crackdown on amateur pyromancers reveals how widespread and risky the practice became. A court record from Umma details the trial of a merchant's son who burned 7 houses trying to predict his father's trade routes, accidentally torching a neighbor's grain silo. His punishment, forced to rebuild full-scale replicas of what he destroyed, a rare instance of poetic justice in antiquity. Another text warns against street seers who used cheaper materials like reed huts, producing false smoke that allegedly caused a governor to mistime his tax collection with disastrous results. Archaeology confirms these weren't just metaphors. At Kish, researchers found a diviner's kit containing 20 charred house models, their remains sorted by successful and failed prophecies based on attached clay tags. The successful pile showed meticulous burn patterns controlled, even charring, while the failures were reduced to ash, suggesting the priests had mastered a form of ancient fire chemistry. Chemical analysis detected traces of saltpeter in the better-preserved models, an early form of flame retardant to prolong burning for clearer smoke readings. The most haunting evidence comes from Mary's royal archives. A diplomat's letter recounts attending a prophecy session for the king. When the third house's smoke formed a crouching lion, the chief seer turned pale and cancelled the campaign. Military records later confirmed the avoided battle coincided with a devastating sandstorm. Either incredible luck or proof, the Sumerians recognized subtle atmospheric cues in smoke behavior. Modern fire scientists have recreated these rituals with startling results. Using Sumerian oil blends and clay compositions, teams at Cambridge found certain smoke patterns reliably signal humidity shifts, hinting these priests may have been unwitting meteorologists. That crouching lion shape, it forms when smoke interacts with the dry, sinking air preceding desert winds. The Sumerians didn't just see omens in those flames, they were reading the air itself, translating physics into theology, one burning house at a time. So the next time you light a candle, watch the smoke curl. You're participating in a tradition far older than you'd imagine, one where fire wasn't just destruction, but a language, whispering secrets across 5,000 years to anyone willing to stare into the flames. Prisoners in ancient Sumer didn't just serve time, they became living, trembling instruments of the gods, their every twitch and stumble transformed into celestial prophecy. Archaeologists call them oracle collars, but these were no ordinary shackles. Excavated from the ruins of Nippur and Ur, these heavy lead bands, now displayed in the British Museum, bear cuneiform inscriptions that turn wearers into unwilling mediums. Imagine the scene, a line of chained prisoners, their necks encircled by grooved metal, as priests scrutinized their movements like human tea leaves. A sudden jerk to the left might signal a favorable omen for the harvest. An uncontrollable shudder could warn of impending war. This wasn't punishment, it was divination by bodily coercion, where the randomness of human suffering was reframed as divine communication. The collars themselves were marvels of ritual engineering. Each was cast with a unique pattern of grooves and indentations designed to channel sweat into specific cuneiform characters, literally inscribing the god's will through bodily fluids. One particularly well-preserved specimen from still bears the chilling phrase, "The restless one speaks truth." Forensic analysis reveals these collars weren't just heavy, averaging 15 pounds, but lined with bitumen mixed with hallucinogenic ergot fungus, likely inducing tremors that priests could interpret as messages. The British Museum's display includes one with an intact chain ending in a bronze weight shaped like a demon's head, ensuring wearers would involuntarily sway as if haunted. Why use prisoners? Sumerian theology held that those who'd broken societal laws existed in a liminal state, their souls already touching the underworld. Temple records from Lhasa describe how murderers were preferred for military prophecies, their violence making them attuned to the god of battles, while thieves became economic oracles, their movements supposedly predicting market fluctuations. One tablet recounts a king delaying grain shipments because a collared pickpocket spasm spelled rot in the eastern silos. When archaeologists later excavated those very storerooms, they found mildewed barley exactly where the prisoners' convulsions had indicated. The process was as systematic as it was cruel. Prisoners underwent 3 days of ritual purification, forced ingestion of salted water to induce dehydration, making their eventual sweat more potent. Then collared and chained together in gangs, they were paraded through temples while priests chanted, "Let the guilty body speak what the pure mouth cannot." Excavated tally tablets from Isin record success rates, with some prisoners marked as particularly eloquent prophets, their collars reused until the inscriptions wore smooth. The same records note these human oracles rarely survived more than 6 months, victims of lead poisoning, exhaustion, or the occasional interpretive error that saw them sacrificed to appease the very gods they'd supposedly channeled. What's most unsettling is how these practices blurred the line between justice and mysticism. A legal tablet from describes a novel plea bargain. A murderer could choose execution or become an oracle for 10 years, with his family compensated in silver for each true prophecy. Some families even sued when their collared relatives died prematurely, demanding payment for lost divination services. The system's grotesque pragmatism reaches its peak in a ledger from Eridu that coldly calculates a prisoner's value per convulsion. Modern neurology offers a grim explanation for the prophecies. Lead toxicity causes muscle spasms and delirium, while ergot poisoning can induce visions, meaning these prisoners weren't just suffering, but quite literally seeing gods in their agony. The collars survive as some of history's most disturbing artifacts, their inscribed pleas still visible. "I am but a reed in the storm of great powers." They remind us that humanity's search for meaning has often walked hand in hand with cruelty, turning the weakest bodies into unwilling bridges between earth and heaven. Justice in ancient Sumer could be measured in pints specifically, the number of frothy beers it took to pry a confession from a reluctant criminal. The Code of Namu, humanity's oldest surviving legal text, prescribes a punishment that sounds more like frat hazing than jurisprudence. If a man lies under oath, he shall drink 7 quarts of the strong beer, that the truth may foam forth like yeast. This wasn't just drunkard's logic, it was a meticulously calibrated system of liquid coercion, where beer became both judge and jury in the courtroom. The mechanics were as calculated as they were cruel. Temple breweries maintained special batches of truth serum, ale heavily hopped brews laced with salt and psychotropic herbs like Syrian rue. Court records from Lagash describe forced drinking sessions where offenders were strapped to chairs with their eyelids propped open, watching as scribes tallied each quart on clay tablets until slurred confessions spilled forth. One particularly vivid tablet depicts a merchant accused of short-waiting grain being force-fed until he admitted, "Yes, yes, the scales were crooked, now let me sleep." The punishment didn't end with confession. Many were left in stocks to endure public ridicule while hungover, their discomfort serving as a cautionary spectacle. Why beer instead of torture? The Sumerians considered alcohol sacred, a divine medium that lowered mortal inhibitions enough to let the gods' truth shine through. Legal tablets from distinguish between ordinary tavern brews and the fiery beer of Shamash, reserved for interrogations, the latter allegedly containing trace amounts of hallucinogenic mushrooms. Modern chemists analyzing residue in special conical drinking vessels found traces of harmaline alkaloids compounds still used in some traditional truth rituals today. The quantities weren't arbitrary either. The code's tiered system assigned beers based on crime severity. Perjury, 7 quarts enough to induce slurred speech theft, 10 quarts blurred vision and loss of coordination, false claims of assault, 14 quarts unconsciousness. Threshold temple frescoes show scribes recording a suspect's coherence decline like human breathalyzers, noting when speech shifted from defiant to delusional. One ledger from Nippur chillingly records, at the 6th jar, the baker recalled where he hid the stolen loaves. The system's dark genius lay in its built-in mercy. Unlike mutilation or execution, beer punishments were reversible. Once the hangover faded, the offender could theoretically reintegrate into society. That is, if they survived. Medical tablets describe several deaths from alcohol poisoning, including a corrupt tax collector who swelled up like a wineskin and burst after exceeding his prescribed quota. Perhaps the most unsettling legacy is how this practice blurred celebration and suffering. The same fermented barley that lubricated weddings and harvest festivals became an instrument of control, proving that in Sumer, even justice could be served in a frothing mug with a side of forced humility. Long before comic conventions and cosplay contests, the streets of Sumer transformed into the world's first live-action mythology reenactments, where ordinary citizens became gods for a day, or at least dressed the part. The Akitu Festival, the most spectacular of these events, turned entire cities into immersive theaters, with locals donning costumes so elaborate they'd put modern cosplayers to shame. Imagine a procession where your neighbor stomps by in a shimmering fish scale suit, channeling Enki, god of the deep, while the baker's son towers over the crowd in a horned helmet and feathered cape as Ishtar, goddess of war and love. These weren't just costumes, they were sacred garments woven with real gold thread and dyed with precious lapis lazuli, designed to blur the line between mortal and divine. The evidence comes alive in cylinder seals, tiny, intricate carvings used like signature stamps. One housed in the Louvre shows a figure clad in a fish skin robe, its overlapping scales rendered with such precision that archaeologists initially mistook them for armor. Another, from the British Museum, depicts a worshipper wearing a bull's headdress with curling horns so massive they scrape the edges of the carving. These weren't abstract symbols, they were blueprints for festival attire, with temple inventories listing materials like 30 golden fish scales for Enki's robe and 2 ox horns polished to shine like the moon for Ishtar's crown. But why go to such extravagant lengths? For the Sumerians, these reenactments weren't entertainment, they were cosmic maintenance. By physically embodying gods during key myths, they believed they helped recharge the universe's order. A festival text from Nippur spells it out. As the citizen becomes the god, so the god's power renews the world. The fish costume, for instance, wasn't just about honoring Enki, whereas ritually splashed through reenactments of the creation myth, mimicking the god's rise from the primordial waters. Horned helmets, those replicated Ishtar's descent into the underworld, with wearers bellowing challenges to demonic gatekeepers. The craftsmanship behind these costumes reveals a society obsessed with authenticity. Excavated workshops near Ur contained molds for casting miniature animal horns in copper, while temple ledgers note payments to weavers for garments that shimmer like the Euphrates at dawn. Some outfits even incorporated tiny bronze bells sewn into Inanna's costumes to mimic her voice like thunder, or rattling seed pods inside Dumuzi's shepherd robes to evoke flock movements. The most astounding find, a surviving fragment of a god mask from Lhasa made of stretched sheepskin painted with bitumen, still bearing the indentations where Lapi's eyelashes were attached. Participation wasn't optional. Cuneiform tablets outline a rotating duty system where every household contributed actors, with fines for those who failed to resemble the divine. Training was rigorous. A school tablet from Sippar details posture lessons how to stand, heavy as a storm for weather gods or glide, light as reed smoke for deities of the wind. The stakes were high. A poorly performed myth could allegedly bring famine or floods. One humorous or terrifying account from Amma describes a man punished for sneezing during his role as Enlil, disrupting the god's breath of creation. What's most striking is how these traditions mirror modern fandom. Just as today's cosplayers obsess over screen-accurate details, Sumerian texts fret over the exact shade of blue for Enki's scales or the angle of Inanna's horns. A broken tablet from Mari even records a complaint between priests about a costume's inaccuracy. The snake of Ningishida lacks the proper 7 coils, due wish to anger the god of healing. The difference, where modern cosplay celebrates fiction, the Sumerians believed their costumes held the power to sustain reality itself. So next time you see someone dressed as a superhero at a convention, remember, the urge to embody myths is as old as civilization. The Sumerians just took it a step further, stitching their devotion into every scale, feather, and horn, and in doing so, turning the streets of into the original Comic-Con, where the stakes weren't applause but the very balance of the cosmos. When a Sumerian bricklayer laid a wall, he wasn't just stacking mud and straw, he was staking his life on every brick. Buried within the foundations of ziggurats and palaces across Mesopotamia, archaeologists have uncovered chilling clay tablets known as builders' oaths, where craftsmen literally inscribed curses against themselves if their work failed. One particularly vivid example from still bears the fingerprints of its author, a builder named Ningersu, who pressed his seal into wet clay with the ominous promise, "If these bricks crumble before 30 years have passed, may Enlil strike my descendants with barrenness, may my name be forgotten like last year's floods." This wasn't mere bravado, it was contractual theology where construction quality became a matter of generational survival. The discovery process itself reads like an ancient detective story. During excavations of the Lhasa period walls, researchers noticed peculiar clay squares embedded every few courses, some no larger than a modern smartphone. Cleaning away millennia of grime revealed terrifying texts, each a unique self-imprecation. A specimen from Lhasa's city gate warns, "Whoever mixed short measure of straw into these bricks, may Nergal fill his bowels with worms as these holes now fill this wall." Modern spectral imaging exposed what the naked eye couldn't see. Tiny straw fragments and mineral deposits in the surrounding bricks perfectly match the described defects, proving these weren't empty threats but forensic admissions. What's astonishing is the specificity of these warranties. A tablet from the Temple of Ningal at breaks down expected durability by brick type, sun-dried bricks 7-year guarantee, lest they melt like spring snow, bitumen-reinforced bricks 20-year vow, strong as the bull of heaven, kiln-fired bricks 50-year curse, enduring as the stars, the punishments escalate accordingly. Sun-dried failures merited mere financial penalties. Collapsed kiln bricks invoked ancestral damnation. One Lhasa tablet even includes a primitive materials test. When struck with copper, it must ring like a temple bell. If it whispers like a traitor, the maker shall whisper his last. But the real genius lay in the ritual. Before embedding these tablets, builders performed a ceremony called the trial of the brick, where they'd stack 10 sample bricks, then drive an ox cart over them. Only if all survived would the oath tablet be sealed into the wall. Cuneiform accounts describe the tension workmen chanting, "Hold, hold," as wheels rumbled overhead, knowing failure meant public shaming or worse. A relief from Mari shows a foreman watching this test, his stylus poised over a curse tablet like a judge's sentencing scroll. The legacy of these warranties still echoes today. Modern construction liability law traces its roots to these clay contracts, and the very word warranty descends from the Sumerian warantu, meaning both promise and threat. So next time you see a building's cornerstone, remember, somewhere beneath your feet might be a 5,000-year-old craftsman's curse, still silently guaranteeing quality through the ages. The trading floors of ancient Sumer didn't just deal in silver and grain, they brokered high-stakes deals involving the hottest commodity of all, championship donkeys. Cuneiform tablets from the city of Umma reveal an elaborate interstate donkey exchange program, where prized animals were swapped between city-states like star athletes in modern trades. One particularly detailed tablet reads more like a fantasy sports ledger than an administrative record. In the 7th year of King Shulgi's reign, Umma receives the donkey known as Storm of the Steppe, offspring of Mountain Crusher, in exchange for 3 virgin female donkeys, 2 barrels of date wine, and first breeding rights to Wind of Nippur for 2 seasons. These weren't just livestock transactions, they were carefully calculated diplomatic maneuvers where donkey bloodlines carried the weight of statecraft. What made these creatures so valuable? The answer lies in their racing pedigrees. Excavated tablets from the Donkey Scribes Guild at contain shockingly detailed performance statistics. Lightning Hoof, 42 career wins, preferred left-turn tracks, offspring won 60% of their maiden races. Ebony Thunder held the Nippur Cup record for 15 years, susceptible to sand track fatigue. Moon's Chariot, sire of 17 champions, notorious for biting grooms during hunt. Fittings this wasn't mere record-keeping, it was data analysis millennia before sabermetrics. Kings paid scribes to compile generations of donkey lineage, tracking everything from stride length to recovery time after races. A tablet from Lagash even includes what might be history's first sports injury report. The donkey Enlil's Fury shall not race in the month of Kislemu, for the healers say its right tendon is like overstretched wool. The trading rituals themselves were spectacles of pomp and ceremony. When a champion donkey changed cities, it was paraded through the gates draped in red and blue wool, the colors of its new home, while heralds chanted its achievements. A surviving wall painting from Mari shows such a procession, with the prized animal preceded by musicians and followed by scribes carrying tablets detailing its ancestry. The most valuable donkeys even received retirement contracts, tablets guaranteeing they'd be pensioned off to stud farms rather than worked into old age. But the real intrigue lay in the politics. Donkey exchanges often sealed treaties between rival cities, with particularly contentious negotiations involving breeding proxies, donkeys standing in for human royal marriages. A tablet from the Roman III period describes how Larsa's king sent his sister to Umma along with a champion donkey named Diplomat's Pace, the animal's presence ensuring the princess wouldn't be mistreated. The unspoken threat harm her, and Umma would lose access to future generations of racing champions. Modern DNA analysis has confirmed the Sumerians' obsessive breeding efforts. Donkey skeletons excavated from royal stables show remarkably consistent traits: larger lung capacity than wild counterparts, specific leg bone ratios optimized for speed. One mare buried with a silver plaque at was found to have traces of performance-enhancing herbs in her teeth, suggesting an early form of doping. The legacy of this equine diplomacy endures in surprising ways. The phrase horse trading likely stems from these ancient practices, while the concept of athlete trades in modern sports mirrors Sumer's donkey deals down to the contractual fine print. Those cuneiform tablets aren't just dry economic records, they're the first draft of a story we're still living today, where prestige, politics, and the pursuit of championship bloodlines collide. The stadiums have gotten bigger, but the game remains the same. In the shadowy storerooms of Sargon the Great's palace, archaeologists uncovered rows of bizarre clay vessels, each meticulously labeled not with spices or perfumes, but with the king's own hair clippings and fingernails. This wasn't royal vanity gone wild, it was a high-stakes supernatural security system. The Sumerians believed these discarded body parts retained a living connection to their owner, making them prime targets for sorcerers aiming to curse the throne. One particularly chilling jar inscription from Akkad warns, 30 strands from the king's beard, third month of his victory over Elam. May any who touch these without blessing feel Enlil's wrath coil in their bowels. The process resembled a sacred recycling program. Royal barbers and manicurists worked under priestly supervision, their tools sterilized with juniper smoke before each use. Every clipping was dated, weighed, and sealed with a corresponding prayer tablet, some begging gods to blind the eyes of witches who seek these remnants, others promising offerings in exchange for protection. The jars themselves were engineering marvels, double-walled with a layer of bitumen to deter tampering, their stoppers impressed with cylinder seals depicting demon-snaring nets. Modern CT scans reveal some even contained hidden compartments filled with iron filings, a material believed to repel dark magic. But why go to such extremes? A broken tablet from Sargon's archives recounts the cautionary tale of a rival king who allegedly died screaming after enemies buried his hair near a cursed well. Another describes a noblewoman whose stolen nail clippings were woven into a poppet, causing her to wither like barley in salt wind. The paranoia wasn't unfounded. Excavations at Mari uncovered a witch's cache containing locks of hair labeled with officials' names, buried alongside venomous scorpions in what was clearly a working curse kit. The scale of this practice was staggering. Sargon's palace yielded over 400 jars spanning his 40-year reign, creating a chronological map of his bodily decay. Early rain specimens contain thick black hairs with analysis showing high zinc levels, evidence of a protein-rich diet befitting a conqueror in his prime. Later jars hold thinning gray strands with elevated lead, possibly reflecting the toll of aging or even palace plumbing. Some vessels contained surprises. One held a child's milk tooth wrapped in linen, likely from a young prince, with an anxious inscription. May the tooth that fell painlessly now guard his mouth from all harm. Priests performed monthly check-ups on these archives, examining jars for cracks that might indicate spiritual vulnerability. A ledger from Eridu details emergency rituals when a vessel was found damaged, involving the sacrifice of a white lamb whose blood was smeared on replacement containers. The system's sophistication extended to disaster protocols. During palace fires, tablets list hair jars being evacuated before gold or jewels, proving their perceived value outweighed even treasure. Modern science reveals unintended benefits of this superstition. Analysis of Sargon's hair has provided a biomedical diary of his reign. Year 27 shows mercury spikes coinciding with his recorded insomnia, likely from medicinal potions. Another jar's contents revealed traces of myrrh and frankincense, suggesting the king experimented with early aromatherapy for stress. Even the fingernails tell stories. Ridges in one clipping match the timeline of a documented famine, showing nutritional stress visible millennia later. The legacy of these hair archives lingers in unexpected places. Some scholars trace Jewish traditions of nail burial to Mesopotamian influences, while the concept of sympathetic magic using body parts appears globally, from Celtic legends to African folk practices. Those clay jars weren't just ancient paranoia, they were the first biometric vaults, safeguarding sovereigns not through walls or weapons, but by treating every shed piece of themselves as a potential Achilles heel. In a world where magic felt as real as gravity, the most powerful rulers knew true security began with something as simple as a single strand of hair, locked away where darkness couldn't find it. From sacred prostitution to beer-fueled economies, from divination by arson to kings racing chariots to prove their divine right, the Sumerians didn't just push boundaries, they obliterated them. These weren't quirky footnotes in history, they were the foundation stones of civilization itself. Every time you check the clock, sign a contract, or even sip a cold beer, you're tasting the legacy of a people who saw no divide between the sacred and the absurd. Who else could turn a sheep's liver into a celestial map or a clay jar into a womb for adoptive children? Their strangeness wasn't random, it was revolutionary. Look closer and you'll spot their fingerprints everywhere. The Roman haruspices reading animal entrails straight from Sumerian liver divination, medieval curse tablets. Pale imitations of their nail-studded effigies. Even our obsession with celebrity athletes echoes their high-stakes donkey trading leagues. The Sumerians taught us that civilization isn't just about laws and agriculture. It's about the wild, creative, sometimes terrifying ways humans try to make sense of an unpredictable world. So which tradition left you most stunned? The ghost marriages binding souls for eternity, the prisoners turned into trembling oracle machines, or maybe the royal dentists fitting silver teeth onto moon god statues. Let's be honest, no one saw that last one coming. Drop your pick in the comments, though a word of caution. If you're tempted to test that eyeball-licking cure for conjunctivitis, maybe just don't. Some ancient wisdom is best admired from a safe distance, preferably with modern antibiotics on standby. The Sumerians may have vanished into dust, but their spirit lingers every time we turn chaos into order, ritual into innovation, or even just laugh at the sheer audacity of human imagination. They remind us that history isn't just a record of what happened, it's a testament to how gloriously, bizarrely weird we've always been. And frankly, we wouldn't have it any other way.